I've had this controller for months. I was so excited to talk about it. I still am. It's one filled with purpose and intent. I actually dropped it as an Easter egg in my last appearance in the Retro Handhelds pre-recorded podcast. It's really a good controller. So let's talk about it. Now, this was sent for review. Actually, they sent one before it was fully completed. Thank you, GuliKit, for your trust. Funny enough, that's not the only controller that I've received in that kind of approach. I'm happy to honor it and glad that this controller is finally coming to the international market. That being said, that has no impact on my opinions. No money changed hands and they see the video at the same time as everybody else. Now this one, as you can see, is already unpacked, but let's unpack the other one, which that part hasn't changed. And this is the other color that they have available. They have two colors, the black one and the Saturn controller inspired model. As part of the specs, we have Hall effect sticks, we have a floating D-pad, which can go 4-way and 8-way, and we'll talk more about that. We have HD Rumble, so it's their own motor that can do both HD and rotary, which is really awesome. A pretty impressive rumble solution. You still have APG up to 10 minutes, anti-friction steel ring for your sticks, share function. There's a USB drive function with this controller where you hold the gear and the APG button and it'll turn into a USB drive and you can drag and drop your macro file. So adjustable D-pad, 8-way, 4-way, motion aim assist. So you do have gyro on this controller, up to 1000 Hertz polling rate, turbo mode, and adjustable joystick sensitivity, dead zone on and off. And one thing I really appreciate with this product, it strikes such a beautiful balance between being a modern controller, but all that it does that is modern has no impact on how it can also feel retro. It's probably the best in-between controller I've tested to date that manages to do both. Not necessarily as good as one another, but it does both in a way that it can distinguish itself within the control. What I'm saying is, it's almost like you're getting two controllers in one. All right, let's unbox it. It comes with its own case, which is very common to GuliKit controllers. You have your sticker in the box, a cable, USB-A to USB-C. You have your product brochure, and lastly, a pretty thick manual because it has a lot of different languages, but everything is in there. When it comes to the controller itself, there are notches to attach a mobile phone holder. So I would assume that this would come at a little later time, but at this point in time, as far as I know, it's not available, or if it is, I wouldn't know where to buy it. If you look closely, it's a little hard to pick up when I put it this way, but if you see that it's kind of slanted a little bit. Now, of course, it doesn't have the 6 buttons array, which that was a comment I had, and right now they were not trying to do that, but quite frankly, I think I like this approach better. But if you're playing specifically Sega games, it might be a little confusing at times if you were expecting to have the A, B, C, and XYZ. Sadly, that is not the case here. They bounce back very nicely, but they also have a fairly long distance travel, much like traditional controllers. While I would say that it is not necessarily a membrane that feels exactly like retro gamepads, it does have a very nice nostalgic feel to it, but just past the edge where it's better because modern technology has evolved since. I really like the feel of those face buttons, and the D-pad is just phenomenal. Now, there is one thing I want to bring to your attention. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a cove here. So in some cases, it's like, in a way, it kind of directs your thumb as you're pushing forward, as if you have a pathway that your thumb is trying to follow. But sometimes I do find it gets a little bit in the way. Not a big deal, however. Very nice D-pad to operate. Extremely silent membrane. It rolls by itself. It's so easy to roll. It feels really nice. The RGB here around your pairing button is gonna let you know of certain indicators. For example, if you're going to the USB drive mode, which I don't think I can kick in because I'm not plugged in, as you hold the gear and push, oh, there it is. That means that you are currently in the USB drive mode. So you just do it again and it'll get out of that mode. This one is probably more Sega Genesis inspired. This one, that is definitely more Saturn. I'll do my usual testing, although I want to prepare you for that. I don't think that's where the value of this controller is, but still, you know, just for consistency, I did the whole thing, and we'll definitely talk about that very shortly. You do have a USB-C up top, so you can charge it, of course, or use it wired. And then you have an 800 milliamp hour battery. 800 milliamp hour would probably last about 8 hours, give or take. Of course, that can vary depending on how much you use gyro, on how much there's rumble, and all these kinds of things. And when it comes to the modes, so on the Windows side is actually a non-spoofed D input mode. Now, of course, you don't really have extra buttons here, so there's no concerns of having unique inputs, but that's one of the modes that you can use. The iOS mode is spoofed as an Xbox controller, and indeed it works on iOS, but it also works on Android, PC, and of course the Switch mode is going to be spoofed as a Switch Pro controller, where when used on the Switch, you'll have all the features. It will power up your Switch from sleep. You don't have any amiibo features. HD Rumble, of course, works with this controller, which is awesome. So let's not waste a second more and let's go figure out how this controller feels and operates on my PC. When it comes to software with GuliKit's controllers, you never really have one. Everything you have is on board on the controller itself. So you do have calibration for the joystick, calibration for the gyro. Pairing is easy because you'll just use the switch in the back and then your pairing button. And then this is to use your macro. They explain how to operate it. And that's where it can get a little complicated. You have all the different shortcuts that will let you achieve a bunch of things. This one is very important. But yeah, here they are as a whole. And let's move to the audio test. A rather silent controller, and let's fly through this, starting with stick tremor. There were no perceivable ones. No axis sniping either. There were no stick snapback. You can choose between raw and corrected, raw at approximately 17%, and corrected at a flawless 0.0. You can activate and deactivate inner dead zone, and there's really just a little bit when you do activate it, but if you don't, there's basically no dead zone at all. There is pretty much no gap dead zone either. And there's just a little bit of outer dead zone, but barely. Your stick tension is super high and sits at 90 TGF, give or take. And your stick resolution sits at 0.0010 for up to 220 steps. The diagonal focus was decent, not the best, all things considered, but still it was good enough. But the rolling test was probably one of the best I've ever seen on a controller. It's pretty much impossible to have a misinput on this one. Adjacent directions can actually be turned on or off using the 4-way to 8-way mode, and we'll talk a little more about this during the video. Accidental inputs also did very, very well on this controller overall. There is a center pivot, but it's almost impossible to hit it without hitting one key or another, but you can indeed repress it down in its socket. And as is in the name, it's a floating D-pad, super easy to actuate from the center. It really floats. You require little to no pressure to operate it from the center. The triggers are digital, right? So there is no analog to them, and there is no dampening at all. It's an extremely low travel button. Arguably, this could feel like having a hair trigger at all times, but they stick a little bit. Quite frankly, they're not my favorite triggers, but it's also a button I don't care as much on this controller. And when going into aim labs, a mix of the ergonomics and just the tension of those sticks. The sticks actually do feel good, all things considered, but the tension is so high, it's actually quite hard to aim with those sticks, so I wouldn't recommend it for that, but in a pinch, it'll do it. And while I did not focus on that in this specific test, there is gyro redirection natively on the controllers with GuliKit, and it's one of the better implementation for gyro on the controller, so there's always that if you absolutely must aim with this controller, and being that it's so light and has this nice ergonomic, it might actually do a good job when relying on gyro. And when jumping into Street Fighter, as you could probably imagine, it was a pretty positive experience. One that is both accompanied with nostalgia, extremely high level of comfort, and overall a good execution. There are some D-pads that I will be more precise on, but this just has a nice mix of a lot of things that makes retro gaming that much more pleasant when using these types of D-pads. Definitely something positive when playing Street Fighter. And also when talking about a modern platformer that has more of a retro style approach to their controls, it was just, again, so pleasant to use overall, and something that is pretty guaranteed to become my main go-to when I'm playing a game that is primarily D-pad usage, especially if it has a retro style to it. And at the same time, when looking at something that is more modern in terms of a platformer, it was not as pleasant an experience. I mean, it felt great, don't get me wrong, the comfort was still there, but it's just not as responsive as what I would expect and what I feel I would require at this point for games that are more timing based and just more mechanic heavy, even if they have the look of a more retro kind of game. I went into Pocket Cars for beeps and giggles really, but that's not the controller for it. The only way that you're gonna get gradual inputs on racing games is if you tap, and that trigger is just, it's not really a good trigger for fast tapping, which is why I also wouldn't necessarily go with that for aiming, even if gyro is good. Figured I'd put it just, yeah. And when looking at performance, this is one part that may turn people off. The promotional material says up to 1000 Hz on wired and up to 170 on Bluetooth. And while indeed it would be the case, the average isn't, because while you will get some ticks that will match what they're stating, you'll also have ticks 2 to 3 more after, where it'll be 2 to 3 times slower, which brings the average down, especially when looking at Bluetooth. That said, when playing, it did not translate to a bad experience, but I think it just goes to show that this is not the controller to go pro, not the controller to go competitive, and probably one of the reasons why I was struggling in Run. It's one of those controllers that is more for leisure when trying to enjoy a nostalgic experience, or to dive into something that is just more, you know, slower pace, more about the journey than it is about the performance, if that makes sense. And for latency, we had 18 milliseconds on buttons and 34 milliseconds on sticks, which again, I think reiterates the fact that this is not a controller designed for competitiveness, but rather for convenience. But I'm super happy to see that the latency on the buttons are good. Now, when it comes to Steam Deck, I actually tried to get it to connect. It didn't, but it might have been an issue on my end. And to be honest, I was quite exhausted when I filmed this, so I just decided to move on. But let's see how it does on the Switch. I have my Switch here. We have the controller, which is powered off right now, and if I power the button, it'll open up the Switch just fine. When looking specifically at a Genesis game, there's this one thing in particular that I really want to bring to your attention. If you watch Russ from Retro Game Scores videos, which you probably do because he's a great creator, you'll know that he has this contra test, and where we just go back and forth between the D-pad, and you'll notice that here, in this case, my character is not moving. But if we do the gear button and D-pad right, I'll get one vibration. If I'll do it again, I'll get a shorter vibration. The longer vibration means that we are now in 8-way mode. And now you'll see that it works just fine. And so if I do it again, it won't, because we are in the 4-way mode. And for example, in a game like this, if you don't want your character to move from one direction, that's where you'd want to use the 4-way mode. And if you want your character to move, or for example, you're playing a fighting game where you have commands such as a half crescent moon like Street Fighter, you'll probably want to have the A-way, as it'll work better for those diagonals. And this is something that you can address with this controller, which also makes it extremely good depending on the type of retro game that you play and what you're trying to achieve in the games themselves. And when it comes to retro gaming, it's just such a beautiful controller, because contrary to other options on the market that also has the sticks, here I find that the sticks, you completely forget about them. It's like they don't exist. It's like they're not there as you're holding the controller. And also, it's an ergonomic style that we don't see anywhere near as much. Now, they may not be necessarily everyone's cup of tea, but if they are yours, you're going to be well served with this controller. There's really not much that you can't do. And what's amazing, it does all that by also retaining some extra features that are more modern. For example, gyro with your controller, and that rumble when the stage starts. Even though that game does not support HD rumble, I'm getting an amazing experience, because even in the games that are not necessarily HD rumble, you're getting a lot of thump because of the maglev motor that employs both the rotary and aptics systems both in one motor, which to this day, I don't think there's another company that does that. If you want just the rotary experience using the shortcuts, you can do that. If you want just the haptics, you can do that. Or if you want both at the same time, you can do that as well. And being that it's a very light and small controller, believe me, you feel that rumble. It's extremely easy to feel on this controller. So if you're a rumble head like I am, you'll like this one as well for that reason. 3 vibrations is just the HD. That is just the rotary. And that is both. So for the purposes of this test, I'm just going to go HD and have you hear the notes. Now, if you are familiar with the sound that a Pro controller or Joy-Con does, it's slightly different, but in terms of the vibration, the experience is there. And this is something that is extremely well executed with the GuliKit. And to show you the difference right now, I'm on the rotary experience. We're no longer getting the notes. And if I put them both, but while getting the notes, we're still getting that extra vibration that comes from the rotary. The KK3 Max is the one that originally introduced it, and it had issues right out the box, but a firmware update later fixed it. The KK3 Pro does fine, and this has the same maglev experience, but in such a small and light controller, it's really good. Like, you feel the thump. Let's conclude this video and this review. Here's one thing I don't know. I don't know the price. Yeah, weird, I know. I probably was not as well prepared, but I'll put it on screen right about now. As long as this is $60 or less, I think it is a tremendously good quality option that, yes, and this is gonna be important, is not necessarily built for everything. You can play everything with it, but the tension of the sticks makes no sense. But which, by the way, you do have gyro redirection, which works pretty good on GuliKit's controllers. You do have it here. So if you want to aim, because it's so light, because it's such a small form factor, it's gonna do a great job when talking about gyro. But if we're talking about aiming with the sticks, quite frankly, I don't think it's the best option out there. But it's an option that you will still be able to use. Really, if you buy this, it's because you're looking to have either a retro style kind of experience in some modern games, or you're looking to play retro games. Now, this will not work on retro consoles. It doesn't, for example, support Saturn. It doesn't have a connector to put on your Sega Genesis. It's really for modern devices, PC, iOS, Android, and Switch. So with that in mind, I think they've achieved what I consider to be one of the best retro controllers, because it'll elevate some of your experiences. It has a symmetrical design, which is not common. And on top of that, you have amazing HD rumble. So for example, to play your PS1 and PS2 games that had rumble experiences, but to have them presented in a more different fashion, and that's up to you, right? Because you can change your modes. I think this is an amazing solution to play, of course, Sega Genesis games, Nintendo older games. It's such a great D-pad, and the ergonomics for those types of games are just second to none. An extremely well executed controller from GuliKit, one I was so excited to finally be able to talk about. So I really want to commend them on this one. While it is not the best in terms of just how well it does everything, controller that GuliKit has put out, I think this is a controller, unlike a lot that we see on the market, that has purpose. That reminds me of like old school 8-bit do. An extremely, once again, extremely well executed controller, and one I would easily recommend. The quality is on point. They really delivered a great experience. And so there it is, guys. This is a review of the GuliKit Elves 2 Pro. Thank you very much for clicking and watching the video. If you have any comments, you know where to drop them. Consider hitting the like if you enjoyed this video, and to subscribe to not miss any future one. I'm Clef. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.